He's all that we see or seem, but a dream within a dream. This video has been long overdue, as since my very first introduction to Warframe, I started feeling that this game has a very unique and deep spiritual symbolism which hasn't been discussed much by the community. Warframe's lore features a number of interesting ethical and philosophical topics such as artificial intelligence, conflict between creation and creators, technological advancement and crisis, self-sacrifice. The reason why I chose the second dream over other quests is mainly because it is, in my opinion, a particularly nice and elegant crystallization of Warframe's central theme: confrontation between chaotic and integrating forces of the universe, interplay between the opposites, a dialogue between rebellious and controlling aspects of life, creation and destruction, order and disorder. These dialectic categories manifest in a beautiful parable about self-discovery, confrontation with one's own shadow, and spiritual awakening. Before we go any further, I'd like to say if you haven't completed this quest, I strongly advise you stop right here and do that together with the War Within, as there will be some direct references to that part of the story as well. So be warned, the coming analysis contains heavy spoilers which may ruin your own experience with this short but beautiful and thought-provoking journey. I also want to highlight that what you're about to hear is not the only rightful interpretation of the metaphorical messages hidden in the second dream, but rather just my own reflections on the topic that resonated particularly well with what I was experiencing in my life. It is indeed the true beauty of art that it can be perceived through different lenses and be subjected to many possible interpretations. Finally, I have to apologize in advance for a rather extensive use of specialized terms. Each of them deserve to be covered in a separate video, therefore I will provide some relevant references in the description below. Please enjoy. So the quest starts from an intro depicting an enigmatic figure of Stalker clearly being unhappy with our past deeds. Why does he show so much hatred toward Tenno? Who is this dark character? What kind of essence appears to be hidden from us? Those are the questions we start asking ourselves in the beginning of this magnificent journey. At the end of the dialogue, we learn that the mysterious voice we hear talking to Stalker belongs to Han-Ho, saint and destroyer of worlds, who guides him in finding the reservoir, the Tenno's weakness, which has been kept hidden in the void on Lua by our sentient savior Lotus. The quest is essentially a race between us and the Stalker in which we are desperately trying to reach and protect our weakness. Yet no matter how hard we try, the ghost of retribution is always one step ahead, determined to take vengeance on Tenno for their sins. He is a very typical representation of what Jungian analysts know as the Shadow. In fact, that's how Han-Ho explicitly calls him several times. This archetype represents dark aspects of the self we are trying to hide and deny. As we learn from the story, the Tenno are responsible for a number of violent incidents leading to numerous casualties when the Orokin attempted to control their powers. And according to some sources such as LV, were even involved in the destruction of the entire Orokin civilization. So that's where Stalker's main weapons, dread, hate and despair are coming from, representing suppressed emotions awakened in the beginning of our spiritual journey. After we finally reach Lua, the plot takes a very interesting twist. I know that many Warframe fans were quite unhappy to discover that all that time we were just kids sleeping in an egg-shaped capsule. I was fascinated by this. In many ancient cults and spiritual teachings, the child represents the core of the psyche, the innocent part of the self. Baby Krishna, Harpocrates the ancient Greek child god, Jungian god in the egg, all these are references to this archetype representing the innocence of our conscious core, potential for change and growth. The wisdom of child is the wisdom of nature, wrote Carl Jung in one of his essays. I had to recognize and accept that my soul is a child, and that my God and my soul is a child. This innocent core of the Tenno is contrasted with the brutal figure of Stalker, the Shadow, the bringer of guilt, hate and despair. There are many good examples of how video games portray the Shadow archetype. Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2, Kessler from The Infamous, Kai Lang from Mass Effect, Shadows from Persona series and others. Very often they appear as mindless hatred-driven tools that serve some chaotic or evil forces. The Stalker is no exception here. Han-Ho, the Destroyer, a manifestation of chaotic forces, is unable to enter the void himself, so he grants the two-handed sword war to the Stalker and guides him in exposing Tenno's hearts. This implies that it's through the shadow we become vulnerable to the chaos around and within us. It's the shadow that clears the path to our hearts for the evil. Yet there is something that makes our character special. Stalker, in addition to his evil and destructive aspects, also carries a gift, a positive side of the shadow. Very often it is anxiety, fear and despair that initiate spiritual search in us. The shadow destroys the status quo, pushing us out of our comfort zone, sometimes forcing us to face what we are not willing to face. Carl Jung recognized this very well, advising against any attempts to erase the shadow which he thought weakens the mind. Instead, he argued that in the journey of self-discovery, which he called individuation, embracing one's shadow is an inevitable key step. Only by meeting and accepting our dark sides can we move on and say together with him, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Sounds familiar, huh?
Dream. Not of what you are, but of what you want to be.
Similar to the Hindu concept of Maya, the idea of reality as a dream seemed to be central to Orkan metaphysics, and we see references to it on a number of occasions, starting from the quest Stolen Dreams all the way to a metaphorical dialogue from The War Within, in which Teshin says that we exist on default between two planes, the rational world we perceive and the void, the irrational one that watches in dreams. In order to master this fault, one has to learn how to utilize the shadow. The void granted 10 other powers, which however turned out to be very difficult to control, so the essence, the inner child, was put asleep, projecting the mind into a Warframe, strong enough surrogate which can be understood as the ego. This for many years was defining what the Tenno were. This scene is probably the most beautiful in the quest. Awakened, the operator crawls and reaches the Warframe, bringing it back to life. The ego becomes aware of the inner child, and this is also when our first conscious encounter with the shadow happens. Both the child and the stalker seem confused about the nature of their own existence, and one can't help but notice that their movements get synchronized at this point. We're all free to interpret this episode the way we want, but I'm inclined to believe that the reason why the shadow's hatred became too weak is because for this short moment the enemies realize that they are parts of one entity and cannot exist without each other. The final battle is also remarkable. The shadow ultimately wrecks the ego, preventing its integration with the self. Now look at how the operator reacts to Han Hao's comments, as if the sentient is talking to him, not to the stalker.
But you're asking yourself, was I one of these wretched things? You know the answer. You still hate them.
And this nails it.
You still hate yourself.
The stalker is Tenno's self-hatred. Its realization produces the last agony of the Warframe. The damaged ego breaks the chains and dies, dissolving the shadow with it.
Is this?
Han Hao cannot reach the Tenno anymore. Desperately he pleads disappearing stalker for protection. But the shadow is already defeated. Not by sword, but by its destruction. Now the child is being carried by the Divine Mother Lotus to a tree-like transference module where the mystical birth of the hero occurs. Purified and relieved, the awakened hero re-enters life again with a new understanding and insights about all nature. The one who aims to achieve something truly great is now deemed to constantly fight the war within, withstanding hardship and temptations, wisely choosing what one should and shouldn't focus on. But this is the subject of another story.
Now we fight on two fronts, my child. The war without, and the war within.